Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gyan Krishna. I'm the National Sales Manager for TVET at Macmillan Publishers. The objective of today's webinar is to help you prepare for the new N5 curriculum. Our presenter is a seasoned college lecturer. His name is Vishal Dukhi. He's conducted many workshops. He has 15 years lecturing experience. He's been a marker. He's developed material for workshop. He's also a well-known author. He believes in a very innovative approach to writing, with the ultimate goal that the receiver must be able to understand what he's written. So over to Vishal to conduct today's webinar. And please sit back, relax, and enjoy today's session. We've got a control panel where you can pose your questions. So if you look at the chat towards the bottom, that would allow you to pose questions, and we can answer those questions later on when he's gone through the presentation. So just make note of your questions under the chat box, and it's over to Vishal to conduct today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gyan. Hello and welcome, colleagues, to this webinar concerning the curriculum changes you need to prepare for in Mechanotechnics N5 for the 2021 year. Firstly, I would like to apologize for my previous webinar presentation being cut off. I had some connectivity challenges. As Gyan had mentioned earlier, I am Vishal, a lecturer at Majuba TVET College. I have to date 15 years lecturing experience. I have many years of experience as a marker, a material developer and facilitator for lecturer development workshops held all over the country. I am also an author of Strengths of Materials and Structures N5. The main differentiating factor with this whole series of TVET First books is the manner in which they have chosen to present the content of the books. Concepts are presented in a way that promotes real understanding without distorting the facts. All worked examples and activities have been carefully chosen to ensure that students succeed in the exams. In this webinar, I want to briefly review and discuss the new curriculum outcomes for Mechanotechnics N5, discuss how this affects the learning content, your academic year, and your assessment. I will also then show you how the Macmillan TVET First books for Mechanotechnics N5 will support your teaching. As you may know, the TVET curriculum for many subjects have been reviewed and updated by the Department of Higher Education and Training for implementation in 2021. Let's have a look at what these changes are for Mechanotechnics N5 and how they will affect your teaching. The general aims of the curriculum remain unchanged. Mechanotechnics aims at teaching students to familiarize themselves with practice and calculations that may occur in their work situations. It also gives students insight into the installation, maintenance, and use of equipment in the mechanical engineering field. The specific aims of the curriculum in Mechanotechnics N5 are to provide the prospective craftsman with the necessary theoretical knowledge to be competent in his or her work environment, and also to prepare the person who wants to follow the N6 Mechanotechnics course by already dealing with basic principles in N5. If we look at how the students will be evaluated in this course, a student will be evaluated in this course by an ICAS mark of at least 40%, as well as a minimum examination mark of 40%, which is required to pass the instructional offering. And The ICAS mark and the examination mark will be calculated together in a ratio of 40 to 60 to derive the promotional mark. The examination in Mechanotechnics N5 will be conducted as follows. One paper will be written. All modules will be tested with different weightings to arrive at a grand total of 100 marks. The duration of the examination will be 3 hours. The weighting of the level of difficulty of the questions in the course is broken up into the following categories: recall, comprehension, application and analysis, and synthesis and evaluation. The breakdown of difficulty levels according to Bloom's taxonomy are important aspects in determining a student's knowledge and understanding of the learning content of the instructional offering. The breakdown of the level of questions are as follows. Knowledge and understanding will contribute approximately 20 to 35% of the paper. Application between 15 and 30% of the paper. Analysis and synthesis and evaluating approximately 20 to 35% of the examination paper. I would like to spend a minute or two just to elaborate a little further into the workings of Bloom's taxonomy. In one sentence, Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchical ordering of cognitive skills that can, among countless other uses, help teachers to teach and students to learn. Bloom's taxonomy was created by Benjamin Bloom in 1956, published as a kind of classification of learning outcomes and objectives that have, in more than half a century since, been used for everything from framing digital tasks and evaluating apps to writing questions and assessments. The original sequence of cognitive skills was knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. A common misconception that we as lecturers have with regards to Bloom's taxonomy and the classification values of questions that we have just been through is that these categories apply to questions. However, it must be clarified that the correct application of Bloom's taxonomy lies in the response that is expected and the mark allocation per question rather than the question itself. It is almost all the time observed that the solution to a single question can contain all three categories that have been shown to you. Perhaps if possible again, maybe we can also set up another webinar or training session where we will focus on Bloom's taxonomy and setting of assessments that are meaningful and helpful to us as lecturers to help us to diagnose problem areas for our learners. You think that might be possible?
Yeah, lecturers, if you feel there is a need for such a webinar, will you just communicate with us or in the chat box that you feel there is such a need, and then we could consider that for a later time. So we've got to have enough people showing an interest in that kind of training so that Vishal can develop the material around that. So if you could make use of the chat box to say that you are interested, and then we'll take it further.
Thank you again. And yes, colleagues, believe me when I tell you that the training in Bloom's taxonomy and the setting of assessments will really assist us as lecturers to become better lecturers in our classroom, because we will be able to help many more students and reach them on many different levels. Let's look at the changes that are made to the new revised curriculum. We will do this by going through the outcomes of each module and by highlighting the changes per module. In the modules where we don't find any changes in the curriculum, I will not go through those learning outcomes in much detail. In module 1, which is your epicyclic gears and gear trains, this module has a topic rating of 10%. The application of epicyclic gear systems is new. Students now need to draw and label diagrams of gear systems. They also work with more types of final drives. If we must go through the learning content and the learning outcomes, point 1, epicyclics made up of spur gears. Here, the learning outcomes require the student to be able to label the epicyclic spur gears from a given diagram, and the student should be able to describe the epicyclic gear train. Point 2, epicyclics made up of bevel gears. Students should be able to list the applications of epicyclic gears. Point 3, application of epicyclic bevel gears. Students will be required to describe situations where epicyclic gears can be used, list examples of instances where epicyclic gears are used, as well as to draw and label a typical epicyclic gear system. Moving on to point number 4, the cyclometer mechanism. Again, students are required to describe and draw and label the cyclometer mechanism. Point 5, Humpage's gear. Students will be required to be able to describe the Humpage's gear system. Point 6, the differential mechanism. Students again need to be able to describe the differential mechanism and label the bevel wheel differential from a given diagram. Point 7, other types of final drives. They should be able to define the rear wheel drive system. They should be able to explain the front wheel drive system and describe the functions of the clutch in the final drive gear system. Moving on to module 2, which is our reduction gearboxes. In module 2, we find that the curriculum has not changed at all and the content remains the same as before. Take note that this module counts a weighting of 10% of the final marks. We will not go through this module's learning outcomes in much detail as it remains unchanged, and I am sure that you are all well versed with it. Moving on to module 3, which is based on conveyor belts and belt drives. This module counts a total of 20% of the final mark. New content in module 3 includes explaining and describing belts and belt drives, principal types of belt feeders, the operation of conveyor belts and pipe conveyors, and up-to-date safety regulations. Let's have a closer look at the learning content and learning outcomes for module 3, as module 3 has quite a heavy weighting towards the final mark. Point 1, your flat and V-belt drives. The students should be able to explain the functions of the flat and V-belt drives. They should be able to draw and label the flat and V-belts, list the materials that are used to make the flat and V-belts. They must be able to explain the causes of slippage on flat belts, and they should be able to list ways by which slippage may be prevented on flat belts. Point number 2, belt speeds. Students must be able to list satisfactory speeds at which V-belts and flat belts may operate. Point number 3, the types of belts. For this learning outcome, students should be able to draw and label the following types of belts. Those are your open belts, crossed belts, right angular flat belts, and your angular flat belt. Let's move on to point number 4, which are your belt drive calculations. Please take note of the learning outcomes, colleagues, because these are the properties with which the calculations will be based and the students must be able to calculate. Students should be able to calculate belt velocities, initial tension, centrifugal tension, belt mass, belt length, and angle of contact. They must also be able to calculate the diameter of pulleys and pump pulley diameter. They must be able to calculate torque, time, moments of inertia, distances between centers of pulleys. They must be able to calculate the power transmitted to driven shafts and also to calculate the shaft speeds. Point number 5, belt conveyors. Students must be able to describe what belt conveyors are. They should be able to draw and label a conveyor belt. They must also be able to draw and label a typical arrangement of belt conveyors. They should be able to explain what is meant by training the belt and also list the effects of off-center loading. Moving on to point number 6 under the learning content for this module. Point number 6 speaks to the factors affecting the training of the belt, and students should be able to list or to state these factors that affect the training of the belt. Point number 7, the training operations. Again, students must be able to fully explain the training operations and to list the methods that are used to prevent belt slippage. Point number 8 speaks of the types of lagging. Students should be able to draw well-labeled diagrams to show the different types of lagging that may occur with conveyor belts. Point number 9, the loading. Students must be able to explain the different types of loading with the aid of labeled diagrams or sketches. Point number 10, the principal types of belt feeders. With the aid of diagrams, students must be able to explain the principal types of belt feeders. I want to highlight here, colleagues, that when we speak of with the aid of diagrams, it becomes imperative that the students know how to answer these types of questions. They must use the diagram to explain the principal types of belt feeders. Moving on, they should also be able to list advantages and disadvantages of belt feeders and also list various ways of carrying belts. Moving on to point number 11 under your learning content, methods of joining belts. Students must be able to list the 2 main methods of joining conveyor belts and give examples of each. Point number 12 refers to the stopping and holdback devices. Students must be able to list the common types of holdback devices. Point number 13, the operation of conveyor belts. Again, with the aid of diagrams, students must be able to explain the operations of conveyor belts. They must be able to describe the tandem belt drive, explain how interlocking on multi-section conveyors work, and explain the purpose of guards on conveyor belts. Point number 14 is your magnetic separators, and the learning outcomes the students need to be able to explain the purpose of the magnetic separators on conveyor belts, as well as to list the types of magnetic separators and also state the advantages and disadvantages of magnetic separators on conveyor belts. Point number 15, the pipe conveyors. Students must be able to describe how pipe conveyors work. They must be able to name the problems that have, sorry, I don't think that should be there. Let's move on to point number 16. They must be able to list the government regulations that are applicable to belt conveyors, where the learning content speaks of the safety precautions and safety devices. So this was one of the new aspects in the curriculum that has been brought in, where students need to keep up to date with the government regulations regarding conveyor belts. Point number 17, your belt conveyor calculations. Students must be able to calculate the power required for conveyor belts, the minimum mass or tension, carriage assembly necessary to prevent belt slippage, calculate belt tension and the number of plies in a belt, calculate belt tension on slack side, the angle of contact between the belt and the pulley, the length of the belt between loading and discharging points, the capacity of load the belt can convey in kilograms per second, the speed at which the belt can travel in kilometers per hour. And colleagues, I just want to point out that the learning outcomes are quite specific in the units that they require the students to be able to do these calculations. So we must ensure that we equip our students to be able to work in these units. Also, the length in kilograms per meter, the effective belt tension, and maximum working tension in the conveyor belt. So colleagues, as you can see, this module is quite a large module, and there is a lot of learning outcomes that the student is expected to gain from this module. In module 4, which is based on bucket elevators and bucket conveyors, the content is weighted at 15% of the final mark. The aim of this module is to provide understanding and be able to make calculations concerning the working and construction of the different types of elevators. Your learning content for module 4. Point 1, your bucket elevators. Students must be able to state 2 categories of bucket elevators. They must list the 3 main types of bucket elevators, determine the functions of holdback devices, explain the purpose of tensioning devices, list the functions of tail pulleys, identify the advantages and disadvantages of elevators. They must also be able to list the purpose of bucket elevators and explain with the aid of a label sketch the working operation of a continuous bucket elevator and a centrifugal bucket elevator. Point number 2 speaks of your bucket conveyors. Students need to be able to explain the purpose of bucket conveyors, name the different types of bucket conveyors, and also be able to list the advantages and disadvantages associated with the different types of bucket conveyors. Sorry, colleagues, that should read point number 3. The bucket elevators and bucket conveyors. The learning content here, the outcomes speak of the calculations that the learner should be able to be competent in. The student should be able to calculate volume, load delivered, the number of buckets, the volume per bucket, the chain or belt speed, the power of the motor, efficiency, the power to lift a load against gravity, the diameter of the head pulley, and the total length of chain. Students also should be able to calculate the chain speed of bucket elevators. Module 5 is based on rope haulages and aerial ropeways. It contributes an amount of 20% towards the final mark of the instructional offering. The new content in Module 5 is the automatic detachment of trucks. We will look specifically at the spacing of the truck and the haulage of rope. Let us look at the learning outcomes and learning content of this module. Point number 1, your rope haulages. We will look at the endless rope haulage, the main and tail rope haulage, and general factors. The learning outcomes associated with this learning content, point 1, students should be able to describe the two major rope haulage systems. They must be able to make a neat diagram to indicate the operation of endless rope haulages, describe the main tail rope haulages, and also list the general factors that affect rope haulages. Point number 2, your gearbox construction, where we will look at specifically the driving winch, the driving sheave or your chimes wheel, and the deflection and return sheaves. The students need to be able to explain the rope's haulage construction with the aid of a label diagram. They must also be able to describe the function of driving winch, driving sheave or your chimes wheel, and the deflection and return sheaves with the aid of a labeled diagram. Point number 3, the methods used to attach the trucks to the rope. We will look at the jockey clip, the Elswick clip, and the Smallman's clip. The students need to be able to name and describe these 3 methods that are used to prevent rope haulages from reversing and stopping. They must be able to make neat label sketches of the jockey, Elswick, and Smallman's clip, which is used to attach the cars to the moving rope haulage. Point number 4, under your learning content in this module, we will look at the brakes on the driving gear. We look at the operating features of brakes and electromagnetic brake rollers, and the specific or learning outcomes that are required with this learning content will be for the student to be able to explain the purpose of brakes on haulage drives, and again, with the aid of label diagrams, explain the operating features of brakes. Students must also be able to describe what a pineapple roller is and how it functions. Moving on to point 5, colleagues, we will look at the safety devices. We have an entire list of safety devices. I think there's 10 of them there. The learning outcomes associated with the learning content of safety devices is that learners should be able to discuss a good signaling system that can be used with rope haulages. They must also be able to make neat labeled sketches of the safety devices, describe the purpose of each, and explain its operation. They must also be well versed with the common faults associated with tension and devices. Moving on to point number 7, the calculations of the haulage rope system. Students should be able to describe the functions of aerial ropeways. If you look at point number 8 of your learning content speaks of your aerial ropeways, and we have the types of aerial ropeways, the advantages and disadvantages of bi-cable ropeways over mono-cable ropeways, the safety factors, the calculations on aerial ropeways, your capstan winches, and your capstan winch calculations. Sorry, colleagues, this should read point number 9 under your learning content. And this speaks of the new part of the curriculum, which is the automatic detachment of trucks. So we look specifically at the spacing of trucks and the haulage of ropes. And the specific outcomes under this learning content require students to be able to describe why spacing of trucks is important in haulage systems. They should also be able to define how automatic detachment of trucks is done using the disengaging frame. They must be able to list the different types of materials that are used to make haulage ropes. And when we speak of the calculations, the students should be able to calculate the number of trucks, the capacity, the moments of inertia, the rope diameter, the ultimate rope strength, safety factors, power and efficiency, braking force, the rope rolling resistance, time taken by the braking force, the rope rolling resistance, the time taken by a tub to complete its journey. So colleagues, again, as you can see, module number 5 is also quite a large module and contains quite a lot of learning or specific outcomes which are quite critical for our students. Moving on to module number 6. I hope I still have everybody's attention and I am not boring you all too much. Let's look at module 6, which is based on elevators. Take note, colleagues, that this module counts an amount of 10% towards the final mark. There are not too many changes associated with this module. Let us briefly look at the learning outcomes associated with this module. The aim of this module is also to understand the working and construction of elevators and be able to make calculations thereof. Let's go into the learning outcomes associated with this module. Point number 1 would be the types of elevators. We have our goods elevator, our passenger elevators, and then we also have the electromagnetic brake. Students should be able to, under the specific outcomes or learning outcomes, describe the 2 types of elevators, which would be your goods and passenger elevators. They must be able to list the major differences between goods and passenger elevators, describe how the electromagnetic brake works on an elevator, and again, they must be able to draw a label diagram to show the arrangement of goods and passenger elevators. Point number 2 under the learning content for this module speaks to the construction of passenger cars. The specific outcomes required for the learners are to be able to describe the details of a lift well and explain the functions of the driving machine and driving sheave. Point number 3 under the learning content, the guides for elevator car and mass balance. We look specifically at or speak of the safety catches and the wedge clamp. The specific outcomes or learning outcomes associated with point number 3 under your learning content would be for the learner to be able to fully explain how modern lifts are supported. They must be able to also explain why elevator cars are balanced against a balanced mass, and also explain the operation principle of a wedge clamp type of safety device with the aid of a label diagram. Looking at point number 4 of your learning content, which speaks of the springs and hydraulic buffers, automatic door locks at the bottom of the hatchway, automatic door locks on entrances to hatchways, overwinding of elevators, and construction and composition of the ropes. Colleagues, here the learners will be required to know all of these things, and the specific outcome from this learning content would be that students must also be able to explain the reasons why springs and oil buffers are required. Point number 5, which is your government regulations concerning elevators. Students need to be able to list various pieces of legislation related to safety aspects when using elevators. Point number 5, your elevator calculations. Students must be able to apply calculations of the following: the tension in the ropes, your acceleration and deceleration, moment of inertia of the drum, your total torque, power, and efficiency of the elevator system. Let's move on to Module 7, which is based on rail and road traction. Take note, colleagues, that this module counts a total of 10% towards the final mark. The aim of this module is to apply calculations concerning rail and road resistance. Some changes applied to this module are as follows: the symbols that are used, unbanked and banked tracks or super elevation. Students must be able to calculate super elevation, explain the maximum safe speed to prevent skidding and overturning on unbanked curves, calculate maximum speeds without skidding and without overturning on banked curves, calculate the coefficient of friction between wheels and rails, and also calculate the rolling resistance, incline resistance, acceleration force, acceleration, deceleration, tractive effort of your locomotive, drawbar pull. Now, what we'll note, colleagues, is some of this is as was previously in the curriculum, but there are some additions. So let's look at the learning content associated with this module. Point number 1 under your learning content speaks of the basic principles and definitions of rail traction, where we look at your tractive effort of the locomotive and the drawbar pull. The specific learning outcomes here are that students need to be able to define the following basic principles and definitions: your rolling resistance, incline resistance, acceleration and deceleration forces, and your drawbar pull. So students need to be able to understand and define those following terms. The learning content for point number 2, which speaks of the symbols, your road traction formula, motion on level roads, motion on inclines, motion on down inclines, or down inclines rather. The specific outcomes associated with point number 2 will be that students should be able to discuss the effect of centrifugal forces around curves and conditions for no side thrust, super elevation included. Students need to be able to calculate the motion on level roads, your motion on inclines, and your motion down inclines. Remember that they also need to be able to calculate super elevation. Points number 3 under the learning outcomes for Module 7 speaks of the skidding and overturning on curved tracks. Again, focus on the symbols and unbanked and banked tracks or your super elevation. The specific outcomes associated with point number 3 under the learning content requires students to be able to explain the maximum safe speed to prevent skidding and overturning, also to calculate maximum speeds without skidding and without overturning. Students must be able to calculate limiting speeds in kilometers per hour when negotiating curves without overturning. They must be able to calculate the coefficient of friction between the wheels and the rails. Lastly, they must be also able to calculate the rolling resistance, the incline resistance, acceleration force, acceleration, deceleration, tractive effort of the locomotive, and the drawbar pull. We have come to the last module, module 8, which is based on flywheels. Take note, colleagues, that this module counts a total of 10% towards the final mark. In this module, students will be required to apply calculations. They must be able to compare your circular and linear motion and also do elementary calculations concerning moments of inertia, torque, and power required for angular acceleration. Let's go a little bit deeper and look at the learning content and the specific learning outcomes for this module. Point number 1, the learning content speaks of the purpose of a flywheel. And here students will be required to compare between circular and linear motion. So specifically, they should be able to list the functions of a flywheel and also be able to draw up a comparison between circular and linear motion. Point number 2, they must be able to do elementary calculations concerning the moment of inertia, torque, and power required for angular acceleration. And specifically under this learning content, students need to be able to convert linear velocity to angular velocity and vice versa. They must be able to convert linear acceleration to angular acceleration. They must also be able to calculate velocity, acceleration, angular deceleration, kinetic energy, uniform torque, time required for acceleration, average force, mass, distance, work done, frictional torque, and your power and energy. Now, colleagues, although this module counts only 10% towards the final mark, this module is quite important for the student who wishes to follow Mechanotechnics into the N6 level, as with quite a few other modules, because these modules prepare them for the content to come in the N6 level. That completes our look of the new curriculum document issued by the Department of Higher Education and Training. I will now very briefly show you the key features of the TVET First Mechanotechnics book and how these features can assist you and your students to achieve success in this subject. Firstly, the modules and units of our book are aligned to the curriculum and use the same topics and subtopics. Each module starts with an overview box that introduces the content to be covered in the module and lists all the learning outcomes from the curriculum. This is very useful as it also serves as a gauge for the students to check against to determine their readiness per chapter, as well as for the lecturer to make sure that he or she has adequately covered the content. The overview box is followed by a starter activity, which is normally a class discussion designed to introduce students to the content by relating it to things they are already familiar with. A summary of the content of each unit of each module is included at the end of the module, highlighting all the key points. These are excellent revision tools for examination and tests. We have used easy to follow explanations in simple language throughout the textbook, particularly for difficult sections. These will enable the book to reach students on all levels and help them to understand the content much better. In some places, the book goes beyond the requirements of the topic in order to enhance understanding and also serves as excellent background knowledge for the training artisan about to enter the engineering industry. This trend also allows for the foundation to be laid for sections to be discussed in later levels. The book also allows for students to have a brief refresher on some of the content that will be required for understanding of newer concepts. This is done by looking back at some of the key foundational information that is required and also content that was laid down in the N4 curriculum. Some of the special features with our textbook: the explanation and diagrams are clear and written in a way to promote understanding. And my personal favorite part of the book is that the explanations can be followed on the clear diagrams, which allows the student to visualize the explanation. This is ideal to cater for the many dynamic personalities and learning styles preferred by individual students, which makes our jobs as lecturers a little easier. There are various worked examples for the different modules with clear, fully worked solutions and diagrams done, with the vision to show students how to approach the examination questions. We have gray information boxes which are used throughout the book to highlight the important formulae and important rules. Each module is concluded with a summative assessment. This is indispensable for revision and exam preparation and are modeled on exam type questions, which will give the student the practice needed to enter the examination with absolute confidence. The TVET First books also come with a lecturer's guide. The lecturer's guide is also very useful and valuable to you as lecturers. We will briefly go through some of the key features of the lecturer's guide. The lecture guide contains a lesson plan template. You can now easily just fill in the template and you will have a perfectly structured lesson plan to assist you with your classroom presentation. It also has a suggested 10-week teaching plan. This plan is structured by looking at the weightings of the topics and the total time available so as to ensure adequate time is given to the sections that require extra work and time. This plan can be tweaked and modified to suit your individual needs depending on your individual time constraints. The lecturer's guide also features a new innovative classroom management tool, which allows you to map the entire lesson from start to end. This can be reviewed after every trimester and adjusted according to the needs of your students. We also have various preparation tools which can and will assist you in the preparation of your lessons and assessments. The lecture guide also has detailed solutions to all the activities that have been reviewed by subject matter experts for correctness. This is very useful as it also helps you as a lecturer to see the layout of solutions that are expected from your students in the examination, and also guides to the manner in which marks are allocated in the examination. In ending, here is a quick summary of the very impressive features of the TVET First Mechanotechnics N5 book and gives you every reason to use it in your classroom. That comes to the end of this webinar. I hope that I have managed to enrich your thinking and further empower you to handle this new curriculum so that you are able to prepare your students for this new curriculum. If you have any questions, feel free to post your questions and I will attempt to answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Vishal, for a very comprehensive and informative presentation. I'm sure the lecturers would have benefited, and together with the TVET First textbook, they will be able to tackle these changes with relative ease in the classroom. So I've seen a question from or a comment from Shlamulani, and it says the total weighting adds up to 105%. Can you just comment on that, please, or give some clarity?
Shlamulani, sorry, about that. You know, I'd probably have to go back to the curriculum document to see if the curriculum document actually has made a mistake, or perhaps I have a small typographical error in the presentation. But I think that the curriculum document is the correct one. So maybe look at the curriculum document and see. It is very, very possible that I have possibly made a typographical error in transferring these weightings across. I hope that answers your question, Shlamulani.
Shlamulani, if you'd like to say something, you can just unmute yourself and.
Yes,
Shlamulani, are you satisfied with the response? Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the mistake, because as I was presenting, I was writing down the weightings.
Right.
Because it's first one is 10, 10, 20, 15, 20, 10, 10, 10. So the 5 is extra. Maybe it's a mistake.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure,
All right.
Shlamulani, the one that was 15 should have been 10 actually.
Yes, that is.
But yeah, I think it was just a typographical error. I'm very sorry about that. I apologize.
Can
No,
we
thanks
share?
for picking that up.
Can you share the curriculum document with me? Because I just learned last week that the syllabus changed. From our college here, there is no support at all. I just knew last week. I didn't even know. So
Shlamulani, I think that maybe what we can do is we can ask Jan to post up the curriculum document onto the Macmillan website, and maybe you can access it there. Jan, is there any way that we can assist Shlamulani to get the curriculum document?
Yes, we'll say we can email it to him, not a problem. I've got his details.
Okay.
Okay, Shlamulani, are you happy with that response, my friend?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, are there any other questions that I can help with?
Anyone else? Glenn, yes, please go ahead. You can pose your question. Glenn? Okay, whilst we're waiting for Glenn, there's a question from Godfrey. It says, on chapter 6, in terms of the types elevators, there are 3 types that are mentioned, which are passenger goods. I do not agree with point C. Vishal, do you want to take that?
Okay, sorry, this was a question from?
Godfrey Nkaba.
Okay, Godfrey. Godfrey, what we're looking at is in module 6, there are 2 types of elevators. That's your goods elevator and your passenger elevators. But associated with these elevators are the use of electromagnetic brakes with them. So I don't think the electromagnetic brake is a type of elevator, but I think that it is a mechanism that is used on some of these elevators, which you need to now, your students need to be able to describe how the electromagnetic brake works on these elevators. So yes, it's not a different type of elevator. It is a type of stopping device that is used on these elevators. I hope that clarifies that for you. Godfrey?
Godfrey, are you satisfied with the response from Vishal? Or would you like to add something? Okay, just another request for the curriculum document from Sakunzi Lamani. So we've got 2 people that requested the document. We'll have that email to you.
Okay, Gan, I also see from Glenn van Heerden, he wants to know if the textbooks are available. Maybe you can give us more clarity on the availability of textbooks.
Yes. Remember, this is only for trimester 2, so the print copies are not yet ready. But if you would like to view an ebook, we can send you a link to that, Glenn. But promo copies are available at your campuses. We've got our sales team visiting. So you should have received a sample copy of the textbook by now. If you haven't, my email is in the chat box. Please make a note of that, and you can drop me an email, and I'll respond and tell you who should have received the textbook in your campus. We normally address it to the head of department. Okay,
Colleagues,
Chantal, you want to go? We'll send that to you, Chantal. Yes, someone else want to add something? Godfrey. Yes, Godfrey. Hi, Godfrey. I'm not sure if you're having problems with your audio, but we can't hear you on this side.
Okay, sorry, colleagues. While we're waiting for Godfrey, I'd just also like to point out that the curriculum document speaks of implementation in June 2021. So I think that we will have to provide you guys with some clarity as to whether that means it is now examinable in the second trimester or only examinable in the third trimester. So I will try to obtain clarity from National Department with that regard, and then hopefully we can somehow post that up with this presentation so you guys can get a better understanding of when the actual implementation of the new curriculum is going to be.
Okay, have we answered all the questions now? I don't see anything further. Glenn's. Okay, yeah. So Vishal has just addressed Chantal's question about the implementation date. So we'll get a firm response from DIET in terms of when the implementation is taking place, and we will email that information to you.
Sorry, Chantal,
Okay.
just to add to that, ma'am, the curriculum document just says June 2021. So there's no clear indication as to whether that means that the new curriculum must be examinable in trimester 2 or it's only examinable in trimester 3. So that is the clarity that we will provide for you.
Okay, Vishal, so we'll wait for your feedback, and then we'll email your response to the lectures that attended today's session.
Not a problem, Gan. I'll provide that for you.
All right. Then thank you, Vishal, for a great job. Thank you, lecturers, for attending, and I hope you benefited from today's session. If there's anything further, please let's communicate via email. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you for the work. Yeah, thanks. Chantal says thanks. Thank you, Chantal, for your response.